Welcome back. Sri Lanka is known for its ethnic diversity, but that diversity has divided the country since 1983, when ethnic clashes broke out between the majority Sinhalese community and the Tamil minority. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or LTTE, have been fighting the government for a separate homeland for nearly 2 decades. Sri Lanka's civil war has claimed more than 60,000 lives and shows no sign of abating. I traveled to the country's unofficial border, dividing the rebel-dominated north and the government-controlled south, to discover how once harmonious multi-ethnic communities have become unwilling pawns in the conflict.
The people of the border villages, they were poor people. They are living in very difficult conditions.
They have no sense of stability, no sense of community, no ability to trust in other human beings.
When they sleep at the night, they don't think they can get up in the morning alive.
It's hard to imagine that amid this tranquility, fear is pervasive. This is Lankapura on the outskirts of the ancient city of Anuradhapura in northwest Sri Lanka. It's also part of the country's so-called border area, where government army positions are on high alert for Tamil tigers. There are more than 100 border villages stretching across the country. Nearly 300,000 people live along this unofficial demarcation line.
One of the terrible things that happens in these border villages is that people lose their livelihood.
The conflict has denied villagers access to areas where they would normally eke out a living. Farming and fishing have become high-risk work.
When the LTT knows that there is a police post or an army post in a particular area, then they'll attack that, and the village just gets attacked by the way. So most of the time we find that people think we can manage our own security. We don't want either the LTT or the government to protect us.
Villagers routinely pool their cattle for grazing to reduce the number of those venturing into forests and fields where fighting and abductions by both Army and LTTE forces have allegedly taken place. Anula Kamari claims Tamil rebels kidnapped her husband, believing he was assisting the government army. He's been missing since April.
He went to work in the fields, and the next morning we heard news that a man was missing. We still don't know what happened to my husband.
She tells us when night falls, any hint of strangers approaching their Sinhala village is enough to force her and her neighbors to flee.
The other night we saw a torch. We were too scared to stay here on our own. We and all the children fled to the jungle and stayed there till dawn.
Anula has little hope her 5 young children will ever see their father again. And despair knows no boundaries. In a nearby Tamil village, Indrani once relied on government forces for protection, but not anymore.
My husband was working in the fields when the government army came. They blindfolded him and took him away in a van. We don't know where he is.
That was last year. Since then, she and her 4 children have been living from hand to mouth.
My relatives help me, but I can't rely on them forever. My son and I do manual work for food. I worry about my children's future.
Rights campaigners say resources are few for those living along the border areas. They say it's the government's way of punishing those who are reluctant to serve as civilian guards for the army or are sympathetic to the Tamil Tigers' cause. Nisaka Wirasena is an official for this multi-ethnic district.
Resources are not divided up equally. Some towns have electricity and facilities, but if you venture a few miles away, People are barely able to live because they are under threat by the LTTE. They don't have food, shelter or clothing, and the children have to walk for miles just to go to school, if there is any.
Nisanka says the lack of resources is testimony of how communities can become torn by politics.
In Lankapura, there are Sinhalese, Tamils and Muslims living together. They have been living harmoniously for generations. But because of the war, most of these villages, some Muslim, have been attacked by the LTTE.
Inter-ethnic families, meanwhile, are just barely coping with the rising ethnic tensions.
The eastern province, which traditionally has been a very mixed Sinhala Tamil Muslim province, is that there has been intermarrying for centuries, and there's been a very easy coming and going between the communities that has been somehow a bit disrupted and ruptured by the war.
The government insists more funds will be given to the northern and eastern provinces, but many are skeptical. Healthcare for villagers is limited, if non-existent. Malnutrition is high among children here, compared with their counterparts in the south. Are healthcare workers and teachers just afraid to be working in these areas?
Yes, that's right. Most of the doctors and other medical officers, really they have some sort of fear to go into these villages. Really, these villages are very the conditions of road, transport facilities and other facilities are very less. So most of the government servants, they won't go to the border villages. Even if the authorities transfer them.
This is one of 2 Muslim schools in Lankapura. The students are part of the 70,000-strong Muslim community spread out along the border areas. It's a community in which many were displaced by the war in the north. And on the surface, this seems like any normal school. But the irony of it all is that just a few kilometers away lies the border dividing government and rebel-held territory. It's a fact of life that they and the people who live here have to live with every day. Have students ever experienced being in a classroom and hearing fighting across the border?
Yeah, several times. When they study in the classroom, they hear gunshots and start running away.
A.M. Falil is the principal of the school. He's one person who took up the challenge of teaching in a border village after working in Kandy in central Sri Lanka. He holds out little hope for the children's future.
They have no idea about the future. Only thing they think is about today itself.
Why?
Because of this problem, you know. When they sleep at the night, they don't think they can get up in the morning alive.
And every day continues to be a challenge for villagers like Anula Kamari.
I'm angry about this whole war because we're alone now. I have to look after my 5 children. We just don't want this war.
The civil war has caused the displacement of more than 2 million Tamil and Muslim villagers. But with the exception of the International Red Cross, the government restricts non-government organizations in providing food and medical care to the north.